Good evening. On behalf of the Raza Foundation and the India Habitat Center, we welcome you this evening to the third Habib Tanvir Memorial Lecture. Habib Tanvir, as you know, was a major theatre person who developed what could be called an alternative theatre practice, what was more dominant, and in many ways rediscovered the theatrical possibility, the modern theatrical possibilities of rural theatre. So he combined in his work memorably, very imaginatively and creatively, the conventions, the folk traditions, which he made to embody and reflect on contemporary life and issues. He was, of course, an amazing character, and many of us, there are some here who knew him personally. The Raza Foundation, as you know, has been created by the iconic Indian painter Syed Raza, who unfortunately, and that's what delayed my coming here, has been in the hospital for the past 3 weeks. In fact, he was admitted on his birthday, 94th birthday, and he is now on his way home after having been there, etc. Anyway, so we have instituted as many as 8 annual memorial lectures in the name of Habib Tanvir, Kumar Gandhar, Mani Kaul, Kelucharan Mahapatra, Agge, Gai Tonde, Charles Korea, and Daya Krishna. These are people who are from the world of arts and literature and ideas. Shanta GOKHALE, who kindly accepted to deliver this lecture, the third in the series. The first one was given by Sadanand Menon, and the second one was given by Professor Singh last year. And this is the third one. And she chose as the theme, truth of theatre, in theatre. Now, truth in our times is a very much under assault of all kinds, ideological, philosophical, political, religious, what you have. And I have been very fond of saying that there was this concept in India, ekam sad vipraha baudha vadanti. The truth is one, that all the wise men speak differently of it. And my own take on it is that truth cannot be one. If everything is plural in this country, from gods to religions to languages to customs to cuisines to costumes, why the deuce truth be allowed to be singular? And truth, by being singularity, it can become dictatorial, it can become tyrannical, and it can reduce everything to. So, truth should also be plural. And by the same token, the truth of poetry, for instance, the truth of theatre, or truth of visual art, or truth of music, have to be different truths. They might share some elements and some elements, but they need not, in the ultimate sense, they have to be unique and different. But that's my view. We are here to listen to Shanta GOKHALE, who is a very respected person who has been in the field of performing arts and particularly theatre for a long time. And somewhat recently, she did a book for us in the Natran Pratishthan on Satyadev Dubey. which is the first ever book on him. So here is Shanta Gokhale, Truth in Theatre. Would you like to speak from there?
No, I've come here. Okay.
Unlike my host, I'm not that kind of speaker, who comes to the mic, establishes a relationship straight away, and he is of fluency, ideas. They just flow. I've heard him on many occasions. So when he wrote to me asking me to speak, I said, I don't have the equipment for speaking because my voice is a problem and fluency is a problem. He said, no, nothing doing. You'll be okay. And so here I am. I don't know why I allowed him to persuade me, but I've enjoyed thinking about this subject of truth. And I'm going to read. I have a script, and I'm not going to pretend like many speakers do. They have the script, and they stand like this, and then quickly take a look. And they're actually reading. I'm saying I'm going to read, because otherwise I'll fumble, I'll ramble, you will shuffle, and the whole thing will be a mess. So, apart from the fact that I'm not such a happy speaker, I will say straight away, Marathis are known for their bluntness. I don't like telling. I don't like it now even more. Because as I get off the plane, I smell power. I don't like the smell of power. But this is a lovely crowd. And it is not to be blamed for what Delhi is. Truth, as Ashokji said, is not one, is not absolute. And it has, truth in the arts has something else which doesn't apply to truth elsewhere. And I'm going to begin by quoting Pablo Picasso. He said, we all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize truth. At least the truth that is given to us to understand. The artist must know the manner whereby to convince others of the truthfulness of his lies. Manner is a key word, and a word that is more important to theatre than to any other art. Unlike painting, which, if it's not narrative, if it's not realistic, if it's not portraits, can be abstract. Painting can be abstract. And the concrete part of it is the material, the medium. Music, most definitely, is abstract. Theatre can never be, because at the very base of theatre is the human body. And the human body is both centrifugal, centripetal. in theatre. It's absolutely the center. But along with it in theatre, there have to be a whole lot of other elements that will allow that body to express the truth of theatre. And those elements are things like the script, that is, words, music, a scenery which allows free movement for the actor, lighting that molds the space. All these have to come together, and only then can a cohesive experience of truth be given to the audience. The most appropriate way, having made this point, to begin is to look at two ends of the work of Habib Tanvir, in whose memory we hold this evening's lecture. Habib Tanvir arrived at what we know as quintessentially his theatre by a process of unlearning and learning. He had to unlearn all the influences that he had gathered in Raza, in Europe, in the Bristol Old Vic. He put aside those influences when he decided to direct Mitti Ki Gari, in which he used Chhattisgarhi actors. That was his first learning experience, because what he did was to make his Chhattisgarhi actors speak Hindi. Their own tongue, much sweeter, to which they were used, was pushed back. And what they then delivered was a very stilted form of Hindi. It didn't come naturally to them. The second thing was blocking. It is the method by which a play is constructed. When he tried doing this with his actors, they became stiff. They weren't used to being told, stand here, move there, do this and do that. So he found that the speech was stilted and the movement was stiff. And he began to think about these problems. How to achieve fluidity, which would constitute the theatre that he was trying to make. And then he decided, okay, let them use their language. The fear was that the audience wouldn't understand it. But there was also parallel thought that ultimately theatre is not just verbal language. It's many more languages. And somehow, even when an audience doesn't know the language, it understands the play. So he went with this gut feeling to let his actors speak Chhattisgarhi. And the other thing he did was explain a scene to them and tell them, now you work it out, you move, you do what you want. And he would watch. And at some point, the actors would do something which he felt was right. And he would say, okay, now hold on to this. Let's freeze this. So the action came from them, and therefore they were able to do it naturally. The speech was theirs, so that allowed them to put life into their expression. And that, with these two learnings, he gave us Mera Gaon Sasura, Mor Naam Damal, the first, and Charan Das Choi, the two classics of the 70s. And of course, thereafter, every play that he did, using his Chhattisgarhi actors, was a refinement on what he had learned. And when you watched Habib Saab's plays, you just felt there's something completely genuine happening here. Completely genuine. Very seldom you hear a false note. Now, let's take the other end of his career, his penultimate play, Zahiri Hawa. I don't know how many shows it had. I saw the show at Prithvi Festival. It was the last play of his festival. And for the first time, he was using foreign actors. I think they were Canadian. I'm not sure, but I think they, because the play was based on a play called Bhopal, written by an Indian Canadian, Rahul Verma, which he had liked and which he translated and converted into his version. And it was looking back on the Bhopal tragedy. And for Habib Saab, this was an extremely important issue. But there were problems. Because of the foreigners in the cast, the rehearsal process became problematic. They didn't understand each other's language. And one of the most important things in theatre is that people should naturally interact with each other. There's a dynamics that needs to be created, and that wasn't happening. Secondly, because of these foreign people, he had to, in some way, return to the Western form of blocking, because they weren't used to just moving freely and being told, okay, this is the right movement. So once again, with this last but one play, he went back and unlearned the learnings of all the intermediate years. And instantly, the play came through with a whole lot of false notes. There was no truth of culture, no truth of voice, no truth of language, and no truth of movement. So, within a span of 25 or 30 years, there was something at the beginning and something totally different at the end. This actually was in my mind when I interviewed him after this festival. And I was surprised that he, in his mind, wasn't able to connect the problems of Zahiri Hawa with his own theories of theatre. For instance, when I said to him, "You've always done issue-based plays. How do you approach the issue and make it fluid, flexible?" And this is what he says. "That comes from my conviction that the moment you say things clearly and produce answers, your audience says, 'Thank you, nice evening,' goes home, has dinner, and sleeps. Also, there is no single answer to a question. If you incite the audience with a disturbing question, there may be more answers than you thought existed." Now, Zerili didn't raise questions. It didn't raise questions because it was something that had already happened. There was no way in which the facts could be tweaked in any way. He told us who the victims were. He told us who the villains were. So, character flexibility also didn't exist. So, in fact, he went against his own rules. This is something that Vijay Tendulkar had to keep when he decided to do Ghashra. He realized that if you are going to use contemporary politics, in his mind, he was thinking of Bhimranwale and Shiv Sena. And he wished to allegorize this through a story that told us that people in power often create monsters, and then these monsters run riot and destroy the country. It was a very simple political fact that he wanted to allegorize through the story of an episode in Marathi history. It was a small episode, but it had been written about. And he had found all the various aspects of this story, and it fitted perfectly. Tendulkar was a master of realism. This story could not be told in the realistic mode because in realism, as he always maintained, you have to give characters their freedom. You can't control them. You listen, as he had often said. Once the character is there, he's got a voice, he's got a style, he's got his own body language. You have to give him the freedom to express through these things. You can't interfere too much. Now the point about Zerili Hawa and the problem which he would have faced with GOKHALE was that he wanted to say something. He wanted to say this was villainy. This was the result. So, if you are so sure at the beginning of what you're going to say, then there's no possibility of freedom to characters. Which is why he was worrying about form? What form, in what form can he cast this story so that the certainties that he wants to posit do not come through as untrue? I'll use that word. There's a form, a folk form of song and story, which is practiced in the Konkan, west coast of Maharashtra. It is called Naman Khele, and it's a male performing art. And these people come down to Bombay, where the community, Konkanis, is strewn across, no longer, now it's all concrete, but in those days it used to be coconut groves. They were called wadis. And in those wadis were little cottages where these people lived. And the groups from the Konkan would come down and go from wadi to wadi, performing Naman Khele. Tendulkar had seen this form very often, but with the Ghashiram story in mind, for the first time he thought, there's something here, I have to stop and watch. And he watched. And what he saw was a line of men in frock coats, swaying, singing their traditional songs. And every few minutes, one of the people from the line would step forward, play his part, and go back into the line. This is the basic form of Ghashiram Kothwal, as he wrote it. Having found this form, he also found music. Never before had Tendulkar used songs in his plays. They were all realistic, and therefore there were no songs. Naman Khele, the form itself, is a musical form. So automatically, when he was thinking of Ghashiram, it wasn't the form came complete with the choreography and the songs. He wrote these songs. They're songs that are full of irony. As it happened, Bhaskar Chandravarkar, a very young and dynamic music composer, he put those songs to music. And we know music is brilliant. It's just simply brilliant music. Tendulkar saw this play, and as Ashokji just said, he did not recognize the truth of music. He was very disappointed. He said that the music is so melodious and so brilliantly sung that the music is swallowing up my play. So, in his mind, having always worked in realism, word was important. What the word said was important. For many of us who heard that music in that play, we just saw how beautifully Chandravarkar had underlined the ironies of the play itself, giving it an extra dimension that went beyond words. So there was something of a fallout. Tendulkar never ever felt convinced by Chandavarkar's defense of his music. But music as a kind of parallel script, let's call it, because very often it is that. Music becomes, when it is sensitively done, it becomes a parallel script. Asghar Baja, got the name right? Have I?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Because I tend to mix up names. When his play was done by Habib Tanvir, there were songs in it, and Majah said, what is this? There are two things you put in. You put in a comic element and you put in songs. I don't like what you've done with my play. About the comic element, Habib Tanvir said, you know, there's a character called the porter in Macbeth. He is a comic character. But what he is saying is not by any means destroying the seriousness of that play. Because what he is saying is actually a portent of the events that are coming. So when I use comedy, I'm not using comedy as a kind of comic interlude. It is part of what the play is saying, and so are my songs. Again, Raza was not convinced. Playwrights are difficult. You know, playwrights have a problem. I have a problem. We all have problems with directors. Because they pick up a play and then they intrude into it. Then they say things which they want to say. There was a huge controversy in Bombay between Satyadev Dubey and a young writer called Achyut Bazir. And Achyut said, if you want to finger my play, you write your own. Which was bad for theatre because he wrote his own plays and they were horrible. But the point is that Vajat's objection, Tendulkar's objection, is to the basic fact of directors interfering or tampering with the script as it is written. Veena Pani Chawla, when we are talking about music, thought music says as much as words say. Through the course of her experimentation, she came to a point where she felt, let me try and write a play which is all music. Let's see how much music can carry the weight of telling a story. And that's how her play Ganpati came about, which is actually nothing but drumming throughout on the Misapu. As a side thing, that shape of the drum can be made to represent Ganpati because it has a kind of belly and its string which holds the skin can be loosened and dangled in front like a trunk. So she used that as a symbol. She also brought in a saxophone which was part of her theme of hybridity, of multiplicity, that there's not just one kind of music, there's another. And the two can work together and create something else that is equally strong. That was part of the theme. But as it happened, the saxophone also looks like an elephant's trunk. So with the drum and the saxophone, she got two cymbals. But these cymbals were working at the level of the graphic, the shape, just that, no more. Symbols are very dear to writers, to playwrights also, because symbols lift something, supposedly, elevate something, which they do. But therefore, you have to have a symbol that rings true. There are many false symbols. They are all over the place, in our literature, in our poetry, in our plays. But once in a while, you come across a symbol that rings true. And as I pointed out with Habib Saad's plays, that whereas one lot is so genuine, so true, and suddenly you get something which is false. Mahesh Elkunchwar has produced both kinds of symbols. One that is absolutely true and resonates, and the other which doesn't. In Vadachiripandi, the first part of the trilogy, he has a tractor standing outside this mansion. The tractor was bought as a symbol of status. They were farmers and tractors were in. They were the thing to have, and they helped productivity. But the tractor came into a village where you couldn't rely on electricity, or there were no mechanics to repair a broken down tractor. So the tractor just stood outside the gate, doing nothing. Now, a symbol to work, and as I keep saying, to sound true, has to work on 2 or 3 levels. One, it has to have a very concrete, believable presence. It has to be part of the lives of the characters, so that it comes into conversation, into family events in a very natural way. And then it has to also have something to say about the major theme of the play. The theme of Vadachiripandi is changing times. The tractor exactly represents changing times, because at the end you hear the sound of the bulldozer, which is the city intruding into the village. That tractor worked on every level. Thematic, presence, and being part of the lives of that family. In the second part, and this tractor wasn't actually saying, look at me, I'm a symbol, I'm a symbol. The second part, the pond, is constantly saying that I am a symbol. There are stars reflected in me. The stars are the universe, and they are mysterious. The pond is also mysterious. Now, there is only a nostalgic connection of the pond with the family. The two young boys of the family once used to swim in that pond. That is it. So it doesn't have the kind of concrete presence that a symbol should have. Like, for instance, the seagull has in the seagull. Someone just shoots one and comes and dumps it right in front of us. And then it gets woven into the story. That doesn't happen with the pond. The pond comes from romantic literature. We have rivers, ponds, all these water bodies, which simply by being what they are supposed to give us an elevated feeling of nature. They don't because they are not true. They are derivative from romantic literature. Along with symbolism, I personally miss in our plays the truth of silence. Like music, silence can also be extremely eloquent. In painting, we have negative space surrounding the main image. And because that space is there, that image gets a lift. So silence is very important. Directors, by and large, are scared of silence. Silence on stage, they feel, means that the audience will become restless. The audience wants noise, wants action, things to happen all the time. So nobody dares to use silence. Therefore, in this context, anybody who saw Shankar Vishveshwaran's play, The Water Station, it's a Japanese play, which is wordless. It's a 2-hour play and not a word is said. There are characters who walk. They walk very musically and they have mask-like expressions which speak of all the emotions of human beings. There's fear, terror, there's love, compassion. All of these things are present and you sense them without a word being said. This is an extremely daring piece of theatre, but because it has been done with such conviction and with such a judicious command over whatever action there is, the whole play just simply captivates you. But it captivates you only if you have the patience and the quality of attention. Which brings me to the importance of audiences. We are often told when a director does something which she herself or he himself knows to be untrue, their excuses, but the audience wants it. Or if we did it any other way, the audience won't understand. Yes, sure, the audience has an extremely important role to play in theatre. Theatre, as I said at the beginning, is body, a body in action. But it's not a body acting in limbo. It is a body in action before a spectator. So unless the audience is there, theatre cannot happen. I mean, music can, painting can. One of the most moving experiences of music for me was in Gwalior during their festival. And we heard this voice from a distance. We walked there, and there was this musician, obviously a clerk or something. He had his briefcase next to him, and he sat at Tansen's grave and sang. So Tansen was his audience. But he was actually singing to himself, and music happened. A painting can happen in a studio. Theatre can't. Theatre needs an audience. So when people say, directors, that audience won't appreciate this, I often think of Prabhakar Barve, the late artist. He has written a collection of essays called Kora Canvas. And the first essay, he talks about his creative process. And he says that a whole lot of ideas collect in an artist's mind between one work and the next. He's been thinking, oh, I think this image I can do, or this I can do. And it's all accumulated in his mind. And there is the Kora canvas before him. And nothing will come there, because the creative mind is a clutter. So, he says, the first thing to do for anything fresh and new to happen is to unclutter your mind. Now, that is the artist at work. But Barve applied the same principle as an audience. There was a private screening of a film, and he came half an hour in advance. The auditorium was dark. He sat by himself. And when we said, but screening is still half an hour away. So he said, yes, that's why I've come. I need to get rid of all that outside noise. I want to unclutter my mind. And then I will be in a position to receive what's going to happen on the screen. Now, I think if directors had 3,000 Prabhakar Barves sitting in the audience, they would not be able to get away with this excuse that the audience doesn't understand. Finally, I've lost my way completely. Let me just check my script and see where I am. I'm coming to the end. Just to say that there are all these different kinds of truths, of which just one is left for me to talk about, and that is how a play ends. And that has to do, again, with the relationship that a director has with a script written by the playwright. Keval isn't here, but he once said that when he was directing Kamla, now Kamla is a very powerful Tendulkar play. the core of it is how an urban woman comes to understand what it is to be a second class or a third class citizen through the story of a rural woman who has been bought. And that rural woman says to Sarita, the heroine, how much did the Malik pay for you? And it stuns the woman. She realizes, oh my God, yes, I've also been bought into this life which is constructed for me, that this is my role and this is how I shall be. Having arrived at this point, Tendulkar will not take the final step. The last scene is where her husband is lying completely saucered. His shoes are still on. Tendulkar's last scene was his wife removing his shoes and putting them down by the bed. Keval said, this wasn't the point towards which Tendulkar was actually working, but he simply didn't have the guts. I have. So I shall give it an ending without in any way changing a single word. I will make it what it should have been. So his Sarita looks at her husband lying on the sofa, saucered, and walks upstairs. No untying of shoes. And with that single thing, single act, I thought Keval was being completely faithful to Tendulkar's script, and therefore not destroying the truth of that script. My other experience was in Hegadu, where Ninasam, the repertory, was performing Mahesh and Hunchback's Vada Chitpandi. The end of Vada actually puts the final kind of touch on the whole theme. It's a beautifully complex conflict between the village and the city. So one of the sons of the family who lives in the city has promised to take his young nephew who has gone astray in the village because there's really nothing for him to look forward to. Uncle has promised the nephew, I will take you to Bombay. Things happen and the uncle decides not to take him. So the last scene is where this young boy, Parag, doesn't come out to say goodbye to his uncle. He is in his room, completely alone, and just looking towards the departing couple. And of course, it was such a beautiful performance that just that lonely boy standing there was enough to move the entire audience. Hegadu, Ninasam, is run by people who have a very strong ideology which says village is good, city is bad. This is putting it simplistically, but they do believe something approaching this. they chose to do Vada. And they couldn't do the end the way it was written because their ideology militated against this end. So they had this boy accepting the whole. Good, I'm not going to the city. Good, I'm staying back. That too can be how a person may look at the situation. In itself, it is not false. A young person can feel that way, but not as the end of this play. As the end of this play, the director was being untruthful to the rest of it by imposing this end of it. So there is, in this tussle of being able to find yourself in a play, it is true that you can do a play only if you are convinced. They felt they couldn't be convinced by this end. They changed it. But that meant we weren't convinced by the whole play. So it took us nowhere really. It's not an easy thing to find truth in drama. It isn't at all easy because there are so many elements and many of them are grossly practical elements which you have to fight against. But any playwright worth his name has said that you have to struggle. That's the only way that you can come to any kind of truth. Not the spiritual truth, where Grotowski did his kind of theatre, did it. But it was also a personal spiritual quest, which ended with his just simply going with theatre, and that kind of individual seeker cannot live together. Theatre has always to deal with the practical aspects and the very human aspects of the art. And it brings us back, doesn't it, to the Hilsa. The Hilsa, did I tell that story? I didn't. It's a lovely story. Habib Tanvir. He says that the people of Dhaka say that their Hilsa is sweeter than the Hugli Hilsa. So Habib Tanvir says it's the same fish, same Hilsa. Dhaka people say no. The Hugli Hilsa swims with the current. The Dhaka Hilsa swims against the current. That makes it tough and sweet. So ultimately, to find truth, you have to swim against the current. Thank you.
I guess, yeah, I think that won't work.
Brilliant lecture on truth in theatre. Now, any one of you wants to make brief comments or ask a question, you have the chance. We'll bring the mic to you. Let the first one raise the hand. Good. No name, yes, because we record it, so.
The, the whole idea of truth came where somebody asked, who writes the truth? I mean, who says the truth in the theatre? Is it the director or is it the playwright? In a version of Tempest that he saw, towards the end, where Ariel has to leave, he saw it in an open field. There's a swimming pool, the audience is at the other end of it, and there's bushes at the back, and Ariel comes, he walks on water, comes towards the audience, looks into them, stares, runs back, goes into the bushes, and the next thing you see is a firecracker rocket that goes into the sky. And all that Shakespeare said was, exit Ariel. Now, where is the truth in terms of what is the distortion, what is the levels of, where the director plays in, or I mean, if you just say exit, you could just have a very bland exit as well. So this whole thing of grappling with truth in terms of where
Ariel exits. He is not making the manner of exit in any way part of his theme. The director then has to find a way to play this exit. Playwright hasn't told him. Unlike Tendulkar, who says, whose instructions within brackets are sometimes longer than the dialogue. He tells you, this is how this character looks, this is how he will walk. And I was at a seminar on Tendulkar's theatre, and one young director got up and said, I'm speaking for all the young directors here. We don't touch Tendulkar because he just boxes us in with instructions. And because his plays are so complete in themselves, there's absolutely no leeway for a director to move. So what you do is you reproduce Tendulkar. And Dubey always said, there's only one way of speaking Tendulkar's line. It's the way Tendulkar speaks them. So, this is not one of those examples where the director has imposed an improbable end. But actually, if one imagined Peter Brook doing this, Peter Brook would have Ariel walking off. Simple action. And I'd just like to share one thing. When Peter Brook did a workshop in Bombay for actors and observers, there were a couple of exercises that he set for the actors. And one of our most famous actors, and I shall not name him, was the first to go. And Brook said, okay, now I'm standing at point B, you're at point A. Can you just please walk towards me? So this actor did a kind of swagger as he walked. So, brought up on Stanislavski, he was playing a character. No character just walks. He has to walk in character. So Brook said, no, okay, that's fine. Now go back and walk without the swagger. So this actor walked lazily with one shoulder down. So Brook said, yeah, that's interesting, but can you walk not lazily and not lowering your shoulder? So this actor came like a corporate manager, brisk stride. So Brook said, thank you, next please. So actually speaking neutrally in a way is so difficult because you can't just be neutral. I mean, there is something to language itself, you know. Every word, every phrase has its own weight, its own value. And if an actor can speak without emotional ups and downs, it's that language which becomes theatrical. So, and similarly with movement. A characterless, so-called characterless movement, but that movement has to be intense. It has to have an internal energy that makes it theatrical. That can come only with a certain kind of practice. So Ariel would have walked, but we would have looked till he disappeared because he would have held our attention.
I was very interested when you said, I'm Keith.
Yeah.
Say that into.
This is Keerti. In this dialogue, so what is bothering me is one, that are we saying that all playwrights, when they give instructions, they have given, a complete thing where you cannot deviate? In fact, one of the ways in which when we try to work on a play, the first thing we tell our actors, don't read the directions. So that, sort of you have an open mind, you can look at it in any way you like. And so don't be encumbered by the directions, because that's where the playwright is pushing you in one specific direction. Because if we try to keep true to the play as the playwright has written it, then there can be only one version, as you said, to visit. So do you think that that's the truth of the playwright?
No. If on the contrary, you have to discover your own truth. In fact, when a Pune group did Mahesh's Garbo, all of us who had seen it earlier, and it's not one of his best plays, but it has its moments. It belonged to its time, quite definitely. Now, if a young group was doing the play, why did it choose to do that play? It chose to do it, we think, because it saw something contemporary in that play. And if it saw something contemporary, then that would automatically be reflected in the way it was directed, in the way it was performed, and that would definitely come through as something genuine. What happens, the problem is when people think that they are reviving a play. Revival is a horrible word, whether it's in literature, theatre, politics, whatever. So, if that is what you think you're doing, you're in awe of the play, and you think you have to, it happens to Shakespeare all the time in India, not back home in his own country, then you strike that false note. You do have to make the play your own, but make it in such a way that you own the idea, you own the theme, that you relate to both of these things. Then how you perform it and what you do has to belong to the time. This is,
The other thing that I had this question in mind when you said that theatre can't be abstract, and you refer to Veena Pandey's work, something like Ganapati, or we also have something like Habib Tanvir's work. no, sorry, not Habib Tanvir, Kudiyattam. And I think they're extremely abstract forms of theatre. I just wanted your comment.
Yeah, well, it depends on how we are defining the word abstract. In music, when we say music is abstract, it is not telling a direct story. The means of making music are concrete, yes, but what is produced is abstract, because I will relate to a piece of music in one way. My neighbor will respond in another way. Our ways might be quite close to each other, but they're very, very strong personal responses, because abstraction gives you that space to respond in your own way. Now, whether it is Kudiyattam or whether it is Veena Pani's plays, there the concrete actually overwhelms what could be abstract. By abstraction, I do not mean themes like, like Veena Pani works with. Lots of people say it's very abstract. What they mean is that her plays don't tell a story, a linear story. A linear story too can be broken up, but it is still a story that has a beginning and an end. To that extent only is Veena Pani's work abstract. Kudiyattam tells a story.
Story, I think even an abstract painting can tell a story.
No, can and does.
It depends on you.
That's what I said.
So
As I said.
That's what these
Yeah.
forms do. That's what this kind of theatre, what I felt
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
discussing this is,
Yeah.
I feel that today theatre is moving towards more and more abstraction. It's becoming more like poetry, it's becoming more like music, it's becoming more like abstract dance. And therefore I had this question about, sort of it can't be abstraction.
Yeah.
Just my own view.
Yeah, sure. But I think you and I both have to think of the definition of abstract.
Not saying
And how.
that when you can read it
Yeah.
in the way that you like.
Yeah.
Also the thing that experiencing Raza through any art form is a very exclusive privilege of you as an audience, more than what comes from the other side.
Oh, it has to come from the other side.
Okay.
How will you experience Rasa unless that performer has performed in such a way that...
What about painting?
No.
When you're looking at a pitch by, or when you're looking at any painting for that matter, miniature,
Yeah.
It's not really doing anything, it's being done, it's there in time and space, so, and it's you who are deriving what you are from it.
But you're deriving certain, let's say, other things, but you are still responding to what is there, and that is very concretely there. You are saying that there is this god or this goddess, there is this tree. These things are concretely there. So those you are responding to in a painterly way. Look at the way these leaves are done. Look at the way this costume is done. All of this is part of your response, and then there's that final layer which you are talking about. But it's not all. It is part. No?
Any other? Yes, just a minute. Your name, please. Your
My name is
name.
Dhananjay. I teach in Gokhale University. Just 2 days ago, there was a performance of a play called Syahi in Delhi, which was put up by a collegiate drama society, and it was an amalgamation, as they called it, of 3 Tendulkar plays: Gidhade, Gid, Kutte, and Sakharam Binder. It was an hour-long performance in which they just picked up some scenes which they found very strong in those 3 long plays and stuck them together with the connecting device of using a character called Vijay, who apparently has lived through those moments in the play. So he is someone who has had an affair with the woman in Gidhade and has made her pregnant. He is the one who goes into the wrong room and rapes the autistic girl, and he is someone who has picked up a woman off the streets and has given her shelter, like Sakharam. Theoretically, it sounded interesting, and I'm sure Tendulkar would have been absolutely aghast at what was being done to his plays, but one can say that the director has every prerogative now. But what was disturbing was the fact that they read it as, they used the word Vijay to imply some kind of autobiographical content to the plays. So, does someone in the audience even has the right to question? I'm not saying object or censor or anything like that, but even start unpacking this and questioning how far can you push, or are there no limits to whatever you can do with a property that is now out in the public domain, which is no longer under the control of a playwright?
Yes, I think that you do have that right. Once the playwright has passed on, of course, there are some, those who inherit, like sons and daughters, can often sit on the playwright's works and say, my father never allowed it, and in his name we won't allow it. But this kind of thing, actually, even when Tendulkar was alive, he wouldn't have objected to. But you couldn't take a complete play of his and then do something totally different. That you could.
Yes, just a minute, yeah.
Fascinating lecture, Shantali. Multi-dimensional, multifaceted truth of theatre that you brought to the fore. I was listening to it with a lot of fascination, but I'm still not very clear to the meaning of truth in theatre, because to my mind, like the question was raised earlier also, whether it's director's truth, or the writer's, playwright's truth, or the actor's truth, or the audience's truth, or whose truth. To my mind, truth in theatre is the product of a very complex and, lasting something like an hour and a half or 2 hours, or you bring in that period of rehearsal and writing and so on, much longer period. That process of interaction between all these various groups or entities, playwright, the actor, the director, the audience, and the space, the costume, the music, all of it have to come together to communicate to us something that we may call a particular performance's truth, the truth of a particular production. There cannot be a very general kind of truth in theatre. When I think in terms of general, idea of truth in theatre, I think of theatre I think of it in very different ways. I think of it as theatre, by its very definition, is fake, is pretense. We all pretend. Nothing is in earnest. Everything is in play. And insofar as it is all in play, and we are finding reality, we are not actually presenting reality. And that is the basic logic of theatre, and in theatrical action and theatrical production. in that, does that make theatre untruthful? Many people say it's untruthful. I mean, there have been conservative forces in the past and throughout history who have attacked theatre from a very conservative position, saying this is all false. All forms of picture have been attacked because they are not supposed to be true. But it has its own truth, and that truth is something which says something to us about our time, about our life, about the world that we live in, and so on. And I think that's what you were talking about in so many different ways. So I don't really have a question. It's basically like a thought and all these ideas.
It's so lovely to have you agreeing with me.
And I really think it's very interesting. When, for example, when you began with Habib Tanvir, what he used to call giving his actors their autonomy, where they could talk in their own language, in their own dialect, that brought a kind of truthfulness to their performance, which is a very good example that you gave. So, you know, the truth, like Ashokji had pointed out to me, it's very plural, it's a very multidimensional thing. It's not something absolute. We're not even seeking that kind of absolute truth. Because we are not looking for truth. It's transcendental, it's, you know, metaphysical and so on. It's always relative and it's always concrete in that sense, because it takes place in a specific time and space, in a specific content. And to that extent, theatre has its own truth, and neither the director nor the playwright nor the actor nor the audience has a monopoly of that truth. To me, it seems it's the product of interaction, a complex kind of interaction.
See, Harold Pinter, when he made his acceptance speech for Nobel, what he said was that as a playwright, I will write lies and not, I don't remember the exact words. It is the playwright's prerogative to suggest truth through lies. That is the nature of theatre. But, he said, as a citizen, I cannot do that. As a citizen, my question is, what is true? What is false? As a citizen, I have to know that. And in that respect, there is a truth and there is a falsehood, but not in art. That was his contention.
Well, I am reminded of a line by a gay. Incidentally, on the 4th of April, we'll have the next memorial lecture, a gay memorial lecture to be given by the Malayalam poet K. Sachidanandan. A gay wrote a line, "मैं सच लिखता हूँ, लिखकर सब झूठा करता जाता." So he's saying the other way around.
Yeah.
I write
and falsify it.
Well, thank you very much, Shanta ji, for a very fascinating lecture. We are sorry Delhi doesn't have a large audience this evening somehow. I don't know what happened, whatever happened.
They ran away from truth.
And thank you very much, the few of you who dared to come, in spite of the traffic snarls and whatever. Thank you very much.